Hello and welcome back to the HFG show. Today we shall continue with part 2 of our timeline, which is from 1160 to 1704. As you can appreciate, we have improved our introduction and developed new techniques in order to tell the story with maps created by us, the HFG show. And in future, we will have better graphics and our own animations in order to improve the experience of you, our most valuable of people, our audience. However, that is in the future. For now, for today, we go through sieges, the development of technology. But remember, this is just an introduction. And now, I'll pass you on to my son.
Hello and welcome. Let's start in the year 1299. We're through the Silk Road. Black powder was introduced. For now, a highly unstable material, more akin to magic in the medieval times than chemistry. However, this was the first stages towards a new age of warfare. But the classical methods with swords, axes and shields would only last in conjunction for a few further 100 years, while spears and gunpowder will go hand to hand with the Spanish Delicios up until the late 17th century. Also, in the same year, 1299, was the founding of the Ottoman Empire, who used gunpowder that brought down the mighty walls of Constantinople.
That is correct, my boy. However, the Ottomans did not destroy Constantinople until 1453 using that gunpowder. And those walls had held all the way from the age of classical Rome, and by 1566 had grown, the Ottomans, to one of the most powerful empires in the Mediterranean, from the Balkans all the way to the Barbary coasts, who at the time were known as the Barbary Pirates, a client state of the Ottomans, and they would be a thorn on the sides of the coasts of Spain, France, Italy, and all the trade fleets of every major power using the Mediterranean for trade and commerce. Now, for the time being, let's go back again to 1309, where the Castilians are sieging Algeciras. But from Gibraltar, supplies and reinforcements are sent, aiding the medieval city during its crisis. So King Ferdinand V of Castile charged Alfonso Pérez Guzmán with the task of taking Gibraltar from the Moors, leading a contingent of militia and noblemen from Sevilla, with Garci Lope de Batilla, Grand Master of the Order of Calatrava, and a contingent of his knights, with 2 war machines, either a catapult or a trebuchet, there's no mention of the type of siege engines that were used, laid siege to Gibraltar, which surrendered after 1 month.
In the year 1316, the second siege commences, when the governor of Ceuta, allied to Granada, besieged Gibraltar and managed to enter the city, and were pushed back when counter-attack via land in Gibraltar and by sea. This is the siege that was part of the longer conflict known as the Battle for the Straits. This conflict lasted from 1310 to 1329.
By 1333, a Marinid army from the north of Africa, Morocco, invaded Spain, led by Abd al-Malik, in order to get a foothold on the European side of the strait. He took Gibraltar after a siege lasting 5 months. However, fleet battles on the strait and land battles all the way to Tarifa would proceed for the next few years. The Marinids came in order to assist Granada against Castile, but also trying to increase their own influence in the area. After the Marinids conquered Gibraltar, it is with no surprise that the 4th siege of Gibraltar was also in 1333. Alfonso of Castile attempted to take Gibraltar for Christian Spain with the aid of a fleet. He was attacked by the Nasrids from Granada, and the result was a truce, due to all the losses that they had incurred on both sides.
So, before we continue to the 6th siege, 2 quick historical side notes of worth. First, in 1337, the 100-Year War started, and it was actually 116, but this was between the kingdoms of France and England. So while the north was occupied in conflict, this allowed the Castilians, Aragon and Portugal to concentrate on the Muslim rivals without fear of invasions from the north. The second note is that the Black Death, which was the bubonic plague, this decimated approximately 2 million or 75 million, we're not quite sure, severely destroying whole cities, villages and kingdoms. Less taxes, less farmers, less warriors, basically a decimation seen like never. The Black Death was between 1346 to 1553 and peaked at 1347 to 1351, which happens to be during our 6th siege.
Before we progress to the 6th siege, in 1350 Alfonso VI tried again to capture Gibraltar. On this occasion, the Black Death actually decimated his army, including him. So the 5th siege saw the actual King of Spain die during the siege of Gibraltar. Now, another note of importance is that the first recorded use of cannons to defend a city was actually in Algeciras, but this was in 1343 to 1344, just opposite the Bay of Gibraltar. Interesting, as not only Gibraltar bore witness to the first defense using cannon, the rock would eventually become famous for its cannons and defenses, for as the saying goes, as strong as the rock of Gibraltar, for that there is only one. We are now going to go into the next 4 sieges, which are the 6th, the 7th, the 8th and the 9th. Now we're just going to go briefly, for this is just a timeline, so don't worry my audience. However, my son's going to introduce you now to the 6th and 7th siege.
6th siege of Gibraltar was in 1374 and saw Gibraltar taken from the Maronids by the Nasserids of the Taifa of Granada, eventually pushing the Maronids back to Morocco, making Taifa of Granada the sole Muslim power left in the Iberian Peninsula. The 7th siege was in 1436. Enrique de Guzman, Duke of Medina Sidonia, unsuccessfully assaulted Gibraltar.
Now I'm going to intervene there for a moment, for this siege is normally described in very basic terms, which, in my humble opinion, is a travesty. For we have the Moors, we have the Spanish, we have ships fighting at sea, betrayal, diplomacy, espionage, a desperate rescue mission, attempt, and the death of the Duke of Medina Sidonia and 40 of his personal guards during an attack at the Red Sands, what is now the Alameda Gardens, or as I call it, Lo Humphrey.
The Castilian forces, led by the new Duke of Medina Sidonia, Juan de Guzman, captured Gibraltar during the 8th siege in 1462. From now, the rock would have been Castilian Spanish. After 1462 till 1704, but don't let this fool you, for the Spanish also contributed to the development and the improvement of Gibraltar. But we will again discuss this in future videos, as it would be injustice to explain it here in just such brief terms.
5 years after the 8th siege, in 1467, Gibraltar was again besieged, this time for 16 months by, surprise surprise, the Duke of Medina Sidonia, who was part of a nobility revolt against the monarch. He was granted lordship of Gibraltar after capturing it, a position his family held until 1501, when Gibraltar was ceded back to the crown. So then, in 1501, Gibraltar passed to the Spanish crown, and Isabella I of Castile issued a royal warrant granting Gibraltar the coat of arms which it still uses today, although a bit modified, for the original coat of arms was taken to San Roque, just north of Gibraltar, when the rock was captured by the English and Dutch. The image you see is the coat of arms of San Roque and Gibraltar on the screen now. So we move on to 1540, and the Barbary pirates, or Barbary corsairs, or Ottoman corsairs as you want to call them, or as they were known, sacked Gibraltar. Now there's quite a bit of information on this, so we're going to have to make a pirate episode at some point. The interesting thing is these pirates were before the ones of the Caribbean, the famous ones. The scourge of the Mediterranean Sea, up to the Battle of Lepanto. 7th of October, 1571, 31 years after the sacking of Gibraltar, is the Battle of Lepanto, a naval engagement between the fleet of the Holy League, a coalition of Catholic states arranged by Pope Pius V against the might of the Ottoman fleet and its vassals, inflicting a major defeat on the naval forces of the Ottoman Empire in the Gulf of Patras. The Ottomans were sailing westward from their naval station in Lepanto when they were intercepted by the fleet of the Holy League, hence the name of the battle, Lepanto. It was sailing east from Messina, Sicily. Before we get to the 17th century, the 1600s, it's normally just explained that Gibraltar's defences were left in disrepair. And although this is true, this is mainly due to strategic, economic and geographic considerations, which we shall be exploring. However, we have a few interesting dates for you for now, and we're going to be explaining these briefly and then linking them all together for where you get to see the past events leading to historical destinations and actions. In 1651 to 52 and again in 1654 to 55, the English come to Gibraltar to engage the Dutch and French shipping. They got basing rights basically from the Spanish. And Oliver Cromwell actually made this quote: "If possessed and made tenable by us, would it not be both an advantage to our trade and annoyance to the Spanish, and enable us to cease our own charge?" Now, I always used to think that the English just at some point decided during the War of the Spanish Succession just to capture Gibraltar out of thin air, because they just failed to capture everything else. However, it appears there were plans to capture it well before, and not only that, there's actually other dates where the English come here, so they were quite well acquainted with the place.
In 1693, during the 9 Years' War, which Spain and England were allies, the remnants of English-Dutch escort squadron under the command of Admiral George Rooke took refuge at Gibraltar. In February of 1694, HMS Sussex was lost in a fierce storm off of Gibraltar. There were 2 survivors from a crew of 560. November 1st, 1700, King Charles II, the last monarch of Habsburg royal line in Spain, died.
In 1701, the War of the Spanish Succession begins, a truly epic event with alliances, fleets, colonies and new weapons. Also with new recruitment and training techniques, which meant taking less time to train than in the past, for example, compared to swords and archery. So production and training was quicker. This meant that battles started to become truly huge. For example, the Battle of Malplaquet took place on the 11th of September 1709 and was the largest battle not only of the War of the Spanish Succession, but also for the rest of that century. Well, I hope you have enjoyed the timeline today, and like always, a reminder, this is just the introduction, but as you can start to see, there is a lot of information to digest, so each topic will receive the love and attention it deserves in the future. So what we have learnt so far, just by skimming the timeline, is the Neanderthals, the Phoenicians, the Romans, the Visigoths, the Vandals, the Moors, and factions within the Moors, factions within the Christian states of Portugal, Castile, and Aragon. The reconquista, obviously, the Vikings, I've just learnt that one, we haven't actually spoken about that in the timeline. Pirates, colonization, exploration, alliances, fortifications, and weapons of war with their development. This is quite a bit, and there is more. However, we must appreciate This is all even before 1704, which is the start of our next episode.
Hello. Now, I hope you enjoyed that. Like my dad said, there was a few parts that we never went over, like the Vikings. But don't worry, we shall go over that in future videos. Now, enjoy the rest of your day, night, evening, whatever it is where you live. And again, bye.